If you like this video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. For just $1 a month, your name can appear at the beginning of this and many other upcoming videos.
Oh, Rainbow Dash! I'm so glad you're here. I was lost.
Bummer. Later.
What just happened?
The only funny thing in the episode. This was a pretty by-the-numbers one, wasn't it? The Mean Six isn't a particularly bad episode, but it's not a memorable one either. It's just this forgettable, boring, uneventful detour that's supposed to serve as the mid-season finale. Way to leave us with something to look forward to, huh? While Twilight and the gang are on a retreat to take a break from the school, Chrysalis puts together a plan to take the elements of harmony by cloning the main six and using them as her servants. It's not a bad idea for an episode, but the way it's executed feels really lackluster and underdeveloped. It feels like an idea they just threw at the wall without really thinking about it. Like it sounded cool and that's pretty much it. The narrative doesn't seem to have a good sense of direction, and it ends up feeling repetitive throughout the second and third acts. The setup is done really quickly, with Chrysalis creating the copies in the first couple of minutes, and then the rest of the episode takes a much slower approach. The rest of it is scenes of both groups getting separated, with the main six interacting with the mean six, and they're really not interesting conversations. I think what makes these exchanges uninteresting is that these new mean six are just lame rehashes of the Discord in main six from the season 2 opener. It was better back then because they were properly integrated into the story, having an effect on Twilight's morale and playing off of her frustration. And it was also part of Discord's plan, which was effectively diabolical. Here, it's just them mildly annoying each other, getting on each other's nerves and framing each other. They're not used in the conflict in a beneficial manner, and they act like they're opposites for the sake of just doing it. The jokes they go for are just unenthusiastic duplications of Discord's Mean Six, so it fails at being humorous. And because of how mundane and bland the interactions are, as well as the repetitive vibe of the story, it doesn't have a memorable impression. A distracting detail that happens throughout the episode is that a Mean Six member leaves one side of the screen only for a main six member to show up 4 seconds later from the other side. How is it that no one is able to hear each other? How do they not see each other from 10 feet away? At some point you're asking why no one is able to notice this, to the point that the entire episode is just a compilation of coincidences. And it's really dumbfounding that none of the main six are able to tell that something doesn't feel right. They don't notice how the cutie marks are upside down or differently colored, they don't notice the change in their hairstyle, they don't notice how their attitudes are swapping back and forth in mere seconds. There's just so many obvious clues that they should be noticing, but they don't, and it makes them look really stupid for it. You'd think they'd be able to figure out something was up, but they end up being so dumbed down that they act like they completely forgot who their friends are. After all these past seasons, you'd think they'd know each other better, or at least Starlight would be able to pick something up since she's the only one who wasn't cloned, but nope, they all just fall for it in spite of all of the obvious hints. And the lesson they go for feels really lacking because of how obviously they fell for all this. I mean, it is good to teach friends how to forgive each other over a petty misunderstanding, but their reasons for getting mad at each other weren't exactly petty. The duplicates were framing them for some pretty mean stuff, but somehow they apologized despite that they know they didn't do anything wrong. The drama is instantly resolved even though there's no logical reason for it. The main six still only know what they saw and personally experienced, even if they didn't recognize the mean six, so why would they just decide to sweep it under the rug if they know what they saw? Because Twilight was getting all sad and wanted everyone to stop fighting? Sorry, but that doesn't automatically solve the problem, and pretty much everything about the conflict just kind of resolves itself. Chrysalis makes discorded clones while the gang are on a retreat, they end up getting mixed up along the way, the main six simply make up as if nothing ever happened, the mean six are just turned back to wood, and Chrysalis just flies away. Because of how arbitrarily the conflict is just resolved, these new discorded main six are very unengaging and don't leave a memorable impression. They were made, caused a ruckus for a few minutes, and are immediately taken out. The only truly noteworthy thing that ever happens is that we see more of how the Tree of Harmony is sentient and can be brutal in its enforcement. I suppose this does add to how the tree and the castle and the map are alive and connected to each other in some way, but ever since the season 7 finale, it just gets more and more confusing. The mystery of the tree was broken because of how it was revealed that all this time it was just some seed that Starswirl and his friends planted. And if they put magic into the seed before it was planted, how does that give the tree life? It feels like they were giving an explanation for how it's supposed to work, but they only gave us half of it and the other half is still missing. Even those glimpses of the elements looking tainted doesn't do much because it's clear that they were just reacting to the mean six not representing their qualities, and they simply go back to normal after they were destroyed. There's also a few more things that are noticeably off, like that monologue by Queen Chrysalis feeling really foamed in. She's just awkwardly talking to herself, and it's done specifically to give exposition to the audience. And why is the camp already set up? Did Twilight really just leave everything like that? Aside from defeating the purpose of setting up camp as a group, wouldn't the stuff obviously get damaged if you left it unattended? Did Twilight really not see that coming? A lot of people have called this episode a piece of filler, which really isn't a good criticism to give to an episode of a show that's mostly an episodic slice of life. I think the real problem is that the episode was just boring and uneventful. It feels pointless because the conflict wasn't interesting, and it's just resolved without the main six even knowing that something was happening. Even Chrysalis doesn't feel like she was utilized properly. I mean, I see the intention that they were going for. She lost control over what she had, and she's progressively losing her mind over it. Her entire life was flipped over, making her unstable and frustrated. However, she still ends up feeling underutilized. They try making her more of a comedic villain, but she comes across as inept and hapless to the point that there's no room to really make her humorous. And her scheme just seemed doomed to fail from the beginning. And because of that, there's no real threat from her in this episode. The mean six would have been completely incapable of using the elements because of how poorly they represent their virtues, so the tree was just going to destroy them no matter what. And even if they did get the elements, Chrysalis was having a really poor time keeping them under her control, so I doubt they were going to listen to her after they got such a powerful weapon. Her plan wasn't the least bit adept, and when it fails, she just flies away. This is supposed to be a huge deal because it's her big return since season 6, but it just kind of feels like a throwaway idea they didn't really know what to do with, and they just decided to make an episode about her lost status. And it lacks the engagement it needs to be memorable. So, was there anything in the episode that I liked? Well, there were a couple of things that I liked. I do like the smaller details they added to the mean six. The ways they messed around with their hair and the formation and color of their cutie marks was a much more interesting way of showing the differences in them instead of just giving them a pale color. The scene where the mean six are destroyed is also enjoyably creepy when you think about it. They were still living copies with sentient thought, and the way they were destroyed was pretty grim by this show's standards. It's practically a potential direct act of murder, but it's not disturbing to look at, so it's kinda cool. A lot of people like the weird faces that were made in the episode, but I think what really sells it is the voice acting. The deliveries they give are really outrageous and done in a way that properly fits with these over-the-top expressions, making them more fun to watch. And despite their dim-wittedness, the main six did have some pretty good moments. There's Rarity, who's learning to travel without taking so much with her. There's AJ's enthusiasm in camping, which is a nice part of her character carried from previous episodes. There's Fluttershy having some scenes demonstrating her helpfulness and understandably feeling overwhelmed when confronted with so much hostility for no reason. Even Pinkie is enjoyably playful, as she always tries to make the most out of each situation she comes across, rolling in roses, swinging, playing a quiz game with mean Twilight, and even helping everyone to have a good laugh about what a crappy day they had. There's even a moment where she's confronting Fluttershy, and it's really sweet, like it's a direct apology for Philly Vanilli. It demonstrates one of my favorite things about her. She can be oblivious, but she still really cares about her friends and does her best to help them. And lastly, you have Evil Twilight, who's the only unique member of the Mean Six. This is probably because she's the only one that never had much screen time back in season 2, but she's actually a pretty neat one-shot antagonist. She acts as an interesting antithesis to Chrysalis, being able to keep herself focused under pressure and even coming up with a pretty sinister plan to backstab her. She seems much smarter and more tactical than Chrysalis, pointing out the flaws in her plans and presenting a really deceitful and sinister personality. She's practically more like Chrysalis than the actual Chrysalis. Even though her presence was short-lived, I really would have liked to see her duke it out with the real Twilight. It really would have been a fun fight. But in spite of all that, this episode is really forgettable. It plays too safely with its premise, resulting in a very mediocre experience. They could have done a lot more with this one, but instead, they just turned up something really generic. And knowing that this is supposed to be the mid-season break episode makes it especially underwhelming. Hopefully when the season comes back, they'll come up with something much more interesting. We'll just have to wait and see. So until next time, take care of yourselves and stay awesome. This is Map signing out.